Hello, good evening. You're watching the Politics Hub. That was the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt with her update to the media. And we were, of course, listening closely to any update about a trade deal after that significant intervention from the US Vice President JD Vance on the prospect of a deal with the UK. Speaking to Unheard, the Vice President said the President really loves the United Kingdom. He loved the Queen, he admires and loves the King. It's a very important relationship and he's a businessman and has a number of important business relationships in Britain. I think there's a good chance that we'll come to a great agreement that's in the best interest of both countries. Well, as I say, we did just hear from the White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. That was in the last half hour or so. She gave this update on possible trade deals.
Obviously, as you've heard from numerous administration officials, there have been many talks with countries. We've had more than 15 deals, pieces of paper put on the table, proposals that are actively being considered. And as we've said consistently, more than 75 countries have reached out. So there's a lot of work to do. We very much understand that, but we do believe that we can announce some deals very soon.
Well, we'll get more on British Steel in a moment. But first, let's bring in Sky's David Blevins, who's in Washington for us. David, thanks so much for joining us. Look, we get a lot of words from across the Atlantic, don't we? But what did you make of what the Vice President, JD Vance, had to say?
Well, it was a very significant interview, as indeed have the comments from Caroline Leavitt been in the last few minutes. It tells us that the White House is still playing its cards close to its chest, repeating now that she doesn't want to get ahead of those who are doing the negotiating. But certainly the intervention from the Vice President has fuelled speculation that the UK is fairly high up that list of countries who are hoping to secure a trade agreement in the coming days. Of course, ultimately, the UK is hoping to see reduced tariffs but increased access for UK businesses. And it appears that that letter of invitation from the King, handed over by Sir Keir Starmer in the Oval Office last month, has had the desired effect. In the interview, he talked about how much President Trump loved the Queen and loves the King. He talked as well about the level of reciprocal arrangement or relationship they have between the United States and the United Kingdom. And he said that put the UK further up the list than other European countries. In fact, he talked about some of them having a mountain to climb. It was a wide-ranging interview that the Vice President gave, and I think it's worth noting that it struck a much more conciliatory tone than previous remarks he's made about Europe. He talked, of course, back in February at the conference in Munich about Europe backsliding, as he described it, on free speech and democracy. And we all remember that interview he gave following the disastrous visit by President Zelensky to the Oval Office, when he talked about an economic agreement with the United States providing more security for Ukraine than a random country providing 20,000 troops, a country that had not gone to war in the last 30 years. So that was all very negative. He was still fairly critical this time around, talking about Europe depending too much on the US to subsidise its security, and said that the President was frustrated with European leaders because their electorates were demanding less migration and they were giving them more. But overall, he said that if there was a strong and independent Europe, that would be in America's interest, because it would provide a better check against US foreign policy missteps. That's not the kind of language we've heard before from the Vice President of the United States.
OK, thanks so much, David Blevins, for us there in Washington. Well, as the government attempts to secure a trade deal with the US, the future of British Steel dangles by a thread. Scunthorpe's blast furnaces have a lifeline for now, but serious questions hang over the future of the site. Here's Sky's North of England correspondent Shingi Marike.
Arriving on the Lincolnshire coast, some of the raw materials it's hoped will help salvage British steel. Imported from the United States, around 40,000 tonnes of coking coal, vital for keeping the country's last blast furnaces alive. But the cogs turning in this saga are complicated, with the minister now in charge of British Steel rowing back on a pledge to keep Chinese firms away from the sector.
In this case, our difference of opinion on the future was with a specific company. I know there's a lot of interest in the wider UK-China relationship, understandably so, but this was about this company. A lot of the issues in the global economy with steel come from overproduction and dumping of steel products, and that does come from China. So I think you would look at a Chinese firm in a different way. But I'm really keen to stress the action we've taken here was to step in because it was one specific company that I felt wasn't acting in the UK's national interest.
The government is hoping today will form part of what it describes as a steady pipeline of raw materials being imported here over the coming few days and weeks, as part of what it hopes will help secure the future of British steel. Those raw materials are being brought here to the site at Scunthorpe in a race against time, with not just coke coal, but iron ore needed urgently to stop these blast furnaces cooling over. If the flow of these furnaces stops, there could be irreparable damage to the steelworks systems and, according to experts, a heavy cost.
Blast furnace campaign runs for maybe 20 years. Turning it off, you then have to strip it out, you have to reline it. It's a £200 million plus exercise. It takes 6 to 18 months to do, and you do it every 20 years. Even turning it down is quite a difficult exercise. So in difficult market conditions, for instance, you lose money every day and you go bust quickly.
That would spell disaster for a community that has steel in its bones and in its heart. They are hopeful the movement of raw materials is the start of a long-term solution.
It's been over a century of steelmaking in the town. We've had a couple of different sites. This is our main site now. This town is built on and around steel. It's in their blood. It's not about me. I've had my time through this business. It's about the younger elements coming into the business, good quality paid jobs. It keeps the community going.
Here and elsewhere, there are still plenty of questions about supply chains and the shape of steel making in the future. But there's also relief that, at least for now, this place is surviving. Shingi Marike, Sky News, in Scunthorpe.
Well, you heard there from the business secretary not ruling out the involvement of Chinese firms in the British steel sector. That is quite the change from what he told Sky News on the weekend.
I wouldn't personally bring a Chinese company into our steel sector.
You would not bring a Chinese
I wouldn't. I think steel is a very sensitive area.
Let's bring in our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen. Is this a bit of a flip-flop? What is the government's China policy right now?
Yeah, so you had a Cabinet Minister hinting at quite a big reset of China policy over the weekend and now rowing back today and falling into line because clearly that is not the message that Number 10 wanted to send out and saying, hang on, this is just about one company, not about all of China. Now, why is that? Well, speaking to someone senior in government today, they said you can't just ignore the world's second largest economy, and China and Chinese companies, many of them state-owned, are deeply embedded across lots of very sensitive areas like nuclear power stations in Somerset and Essex, Heathrow Airport, 10% stake by a wholly Chinese state-owned company, another stake in Thames Water, also our national grid. Ed Miliband, the Energy Secretary, was in China last month looking at further investment in our power networks. So from the top, it looks like they want the policy to stay the same. And Keir Starmer came in saying that after years of inconsistency under the Conservatives, he wanted something more long-term, more strategic. He met Xi Jinping. He talked about going over there on a visit. The Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary have already been. It all sends quite warm signals, doesn't it? Now, we are now seeing, I've talked to some Labour MPs today, and some of them are concerned that we need to define more clearly what is critical national infrastructure and what are the risks of China being involved in it and where should those lines be drawn. They feel that it is not clear enough at the moment. And after a dramatic weekend in which the government basically had to wrest control of that company of British Steel from its Chinese owner, I think there will be some calls now to look at some of these issues again so that we don't sort of sleepwalk into the next thing.
Really interesting, yeah. And as you say, China is so deeply intertwined in much of British business already. Thanks so much, Tamara Cohen there, our political correspondent. Well, John Caudwell made his fortune from mobile phone company Phones for You, with one calculation a few years ago putting his personal wealth at over £1.5 billion. He was a big donor to the Conservative Party under Boris Johnson, donating £500,000 in 2019, but he He later became disillusioned with the party, and last year he supported Labour at the general election. So someone with a strong interest in both the political and business dimension of what we're seeing in Scunthorpe and the wider economy. I spoke to him a little earlier. John Caudwell, thanks so much for talking to us. It is nearly a year since you delivered what was quite a bitter blow to the Conservatives. You said you were going to back Labour. You've previously been one of the Tories' biggest donors. How are you feeling about 9 months into the Labour government?
Well, that's a long question to answer, but really, fundamentally, they were the only party that I could believe could do any good for Britain. They are doing some good stuff, which hasn't really shown through yet, but they've done a lot of stuff I don't agree with. You know, for example, the non-dom rule. We could have done something around the non-doms, but we didn't need to hit them the way that we have. And when you couple that with the changes in various taxes, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, and so on, and then you add on the insurance, extra insurance costs on there, it all makes us look a little bit business unfriendly. And rich people we know are leaving the UK. I know that without doubt. I don't have the statistics, but definitely more people are leaving to go to Dubai, to Milan, and to Monaco. And this is devastating. And we could have done it so much more smartly.
Do you think that the Chancellor is being kind of straight with people about the difficult decisions that might be ahead?
I think they are being straight, yes, because they're telling people, you know, there's the challenges are tough. I would have thought that question might have been, did I think they were being straight about the 22 billion black hole left by the Tories? Because that's a sort of a different question. Are they being straight about that? I think generally yes, but I think they're making a lot of wrong decisions. I think they could make decisions that are way smarter, way fairer, and way better for the future of Britain. But, you know, that's quite a lot of negative statements I've made there, but I think there's a lot of stuff that they're doing that's right, like deregulating planning and so on, and trying to encourage inward investment via the deregulation process. And I think, you know, Britain has already got so much substance in terms of why people would come here, our law and order, our education system, our fairness. I mean, you've only got to look across the water to the States now to think, well, if you were in the US at the moment, how would that be affecting your business confidence and so on? And we are a very stable country, but we can do more. We can be better. And that's what frustrates me, that we're not as good as we can be.
So it sounds like you're not totally convinced. You know, would you consider giving money to Labour?
Would I? Not under the current situation. It's not about giving money to any party. It's about the party that will help Britain and do the right things. So if there was a party there that I really believed in, yes, I would support them financially as well to help them to get into power.
Has Kemi Badenoch, obviously you used to donate a lot of money to the Conservatives, has Kemi Badenoch said anything that's made your head turn at all?
Not really, no. I think the Tories, unfortunately, are a spent force. And it's quite strange me saying that, since I was an absolute 100% Thatcherite and had so much respect for what she did within the UK economy and within the whole infrastructure of the UK during her tenure, and supported the Tories, really. Not the Tories, the principles. It doesn't matter to me what party they are. It's the principles that matter. And supported the Tories for 50 years. And then I find myself switching to Labour for all the right reasons. It's a very strange, you know, or almost a surrealistic experience for me.
The Sun have done some polling today with Survation. Most people think Britain is broken. Do you think that's a new sentiment? Do you get why people feel like that?
I do get it. I don't agree. I think we're in lots of ways still admired by much of the world for the reasons I've said and many other reasons. We're a very, very strong society with so many attributes, but there's so much wrong as well. But I wouldn't say broken.
You've talked about the failure of short-termism in the past. Is that what we've seen with British Steel?
That's not short-termism in a way, really, is it? Because that was free trading many, many years ago. I don't know when it was denationalised, but it was a long time ago. I'm not sure that comes under the short-termism, but I think it comes under free enterprise, really, more. And then you could say, well, should there be that free enterprise that allows the infrastructure of the country to be put into foreign hands? And I'm not keen on that, especially Chinese hands, because, you know, China is an aggressor. It lacks humanitarian values. It does try and undermine the West's economic structure. And so I think selling off our infrastructure to especially the Chinese is not a good idea. And of course, in the case of steel, especially now where we are with the invasion of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, where we are now, we cannot afford not to have a steel industry, because we may have to go in to really substantial armament production in the future. And we'll need steel as our own internal resource, not provided by some other nation that may or may not provide it.
So where would you draw the line for Chinese involvement in British business?
I think non-critical infrastructure is probably okay. I think it's probably okay because we're a free trading nation. We should be a free trading nation, but we don't want the Chinese or any other nation to overtake our infrastructure, especially that might be critical to the future.
I want to ask you about JD Vance, the Vice President of the United States, talking about a good chance of a great agreement. Do you think that we're going to see a trade deal with the US?
I think it's anybody's guess what's going to happen. You know, that administration is so erratic. They throw so many cannonballs into the equation, and they're exploding everywhere. And you don't really, it's very difficult to predict. And only this last week, might have been weekend, they're talking about now deregulating food.
So you're worried we're going to give too much in a deal?
I think Keir's playing quite a smart hand, actually. I think the way he went across and was sycophantic to Trump, I admire him for, because I couldn't have done it. I couldn't have done that. And he did it, and the very first thing he does is offer a second state visit to Trump, and Trump's bristling with ego, and that's what you've got to do with him to try and win him over. But I think, to be honest, there's no winning Trump over. You know, you might get him for a short period of time until the next issue, and then the next issue could cause him to go wherever. So would I be hopeful of a trade deal with America? Yes, I'd be hopeful, but I'm not particularly positive that will happen.
What's your take on the impact of Donald Trump's tariffs?
I think it's going to be a real disaster for America. And not just the tariffs, but the way he is really creating animosity amongst all his long-term allies. But the tariffs themselves, what we've seen is a drop in the stock market and the very unusually at the same time a drop in the bond market. So there's a lot of risks for the US in Trump's philosophy and policies. And I can only see the whole thing being devastating for the US in the short, medium and long term.
And you're one of the billionaires that has pledged to give away 70% of your wealth to charitable causes. How do your kids feel about that?
Well, they're perfectly happy, because I told them from an early age that it was all going to the cat's home, that they were going to have to work for their living. So, yeah, and that's my philosophy. You know, all my children, I want them to be happy, successful if that's what they want, leave the world a better place, but make their own money and have their own satisfaction.
Are other billionaires being a bit selfish with their wealth?
Well, a lot are, yes. I mean, I find it very puzzling that most billionaires don't sign up for the Giving Pledge, because they don't even have to change the status at all. In fact, if you take the world's wealthiest billionaires, they could give away 99% of the money in a Giving Pledge and still be richer than I am. So, and I find that a little bit difficult to understand. You know, the world is in such a mess. There's so many people that are suffering devastating consequences through hunger, lack of water, ill health. There's so much to do in the world to make the world a more robust and fair place.
Thank you so much, John Caudwell. I think that's all we've got time for. And coverage of the UK's various trading relationships is likely to feature in tomorrow's papers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be The Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Shoda, and The Times columnist and leader writer Sebastian Payne. Right, let's bring in our panel for this evening, shall we? Broadcaster Daisy McAndrew and former Labour Party advisor Max Wilson. Thank you both for joining us. Daisy, what I thought John Caudwell there was talking down the prospect of a trade deal. What do you think?
He was quite gloomy. But I thought it was interesting that he was careful, which I think is right at the moment, to be reasonably complimentary about Keir Starmer within this relationship, acknowledging this is a difficult man to deal with, Donald Trump, and that he's done OK so far. But I think it's fair for him to say none of us know what Donald Trump's going to do from one minute to the other, let alone from one day to the other or one trade deal negotiation to the other. So I think that was fair. I think there clearly has been a lot going on. We know that Peter Mandelson's been having meetings in Washington. We know he's been talking about lifting the tax on the digital services tax. So, you know, there are things going on. I have to say, I'm so shallow. I just kept looking at your interview thinking, I want to be in that house, that 250 million, that famously bling house.
I have to say, it was a nice
kitchens.
house. I did go, to the loo just to have a little look. Max, I mean, this feels like a day, you know, where our relationship with the US, with China has all been in sharp focus. And how do you think the government's managing all that?
Well, it's incredibly difficult. Obviously, it's a multipolar world, and they have to deal with multiple countries, multiple things going on. I think on the trade deal, and what John's been saying was really interesting, him being pessimistic about what's going on, but also what Daisy was saying there about digital services tax, for example. So I think we're all assuming that this deal is going to be great, but a deal is by nature, there's got to be some give and take. And so I'm curious about what we're going to be giving in order to receive this deal. So if we are on digital services, for example, if we are going to give way on that, then that's going to cause a political problem for the government that they're going to have to deal with. If it's going to be something on agriculture, agri-food, that's going to cause a problem that the government is going to have to deal with, adding to what it's been doing with farmers. So as well as having all these political problems that are going to be an inevitable backlash on whatever the deal is, you've also got to ask, what is the purpose of this deal? It is to generate revenue for the Treasury, increase investment, and ultimately generate economic growth. And is that going to be happening in the key industries that the government wants to be pursuing? And is that ultimately going to be worth it? And then finally, are ordinary British people going to be feeling the benefits of that deal? Because if not, you've got to wonder what's the purpose.
I think although that probably the Labour government can take a bit of a leaf out of Donald Trump's book in that he knows that the details of trade deals do not get dissected and talked about in the dog and duck. It's just we've got one over them or they've got one over me, the real headline that actually makes a difference to most people. And I think the fact that so many other countries are struggling to get a deal and are being faced with much higher tariffs than us could do Keir Starmer some good, publicity-wise and popularity-wise, but you're right, the actual nuts and bolts that will affect people's lives will still be worse off than had this whole trade war with the rest of the world not been emanating out of Washington. So that's difficult. It's also interesting that whilst we're all tiptoeing around Donald Trump, is there some hay to be made for the politicians who are willing to put the boot into him? Because very few are in domestic politics at the moment because they're worried. So it has been interesting seeing Ed Davey making a bit of a song and dance about that, because I think he can see an opportunity that he can be the one, slagging Donald Trump off when other people, for very valid reasons, don't feel able to at the moment.
There's quite a unique political space there for the Lib Dems to be able to occupy. Reform can't do it, obviously. Labour in government, the Tories can't either, and with the local elections coming up, it's quite, even though it's a local election, it's quite a nice, easy thing for headlines for the Dems to be pursuing.
And Reform are doing something similar with China. They're the ones really on the front foot, criticising the Chinese, saying we should never have been in this situation, criticising Cameron and Osborne for the golden era and all of that. And so it's interesting to see politicians that are normally more obsessed with local issues, Lib Dems, Reform, really getting stuck into big global political issues.
And how do you think the government is navigating, the threshold for how involved Chinese business should be here?
Well, it's incredibly difficult. I think that this partly reflects growing pains of Labour entering government. I think that if you look back to the last 10 years with the Tories, there's been a real clash over China policy. You've had national security hawks like Ian Duncan Smith pushing up against economic realists like George Osborne. And I think that what we're starting to see now is that sort of inter-Tory debates happening with Labour, and they're realising that, right, what are we? Are we going to be after national security? And are we wanting to ensure that China doesn't have its hands on critical infrastructure? Or are we pursuing economic security and, under the current economic environment, pursuing investment wherever it comes? But I think that with Johnny Reynolds in his, rowing back, I think you're seeing this clash, this conflict. And I think that it's just that being in government means having to make really tough decisions. And I'm not sure Labour have really formed their own position. But I think that this is a conflict that's going to run. And I think we haven't seen the last of Labour's divisions or conflict over China.
Tricky path to navigate. We will come back to you both. There's lots to talk about tonight. You are watching The Politics Hub. Coming up. Sir Alan Bates urges victims of the post office scandal to take the government to court over compensation delays and calls one scheme supposed to settle postmasters' claims a mess. And as JD Vance fumbles a national championship football trophy under the watchful eye of Donald Trump, we'll look at political bungles when they can be shrugged off and when they cut through.
Sophy.
The big announcement.
The battle for number 10.
The drone is above us.
It is a chaotic scene.
They've asked us to leave.
It is a clear Labour landslide.
The car is covered in.
Liberated but left in ruins.
A major incident has been declared.
That's when misinformation floods the zone.
It became clear the media weren't welcome.
These extraordinary images.
Must have taken years.
Who wants to talk about politics?
OK, stand by.
I wouldn't be asking it if I didn't think it was a relevant question.
The winner of the 2024 presidential election.
Quite extraordinary events.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's international affairs editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling.
It's not his country, it's ours.
Sky News, the full story first, free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, the Sun newspaper today got us thinking. They declare on their front page that Britain is broken. They've got a poll with Survation that suggests most people in the so-called Red Wall agree. But the idea of broken Britain creaking at the seams, just not working properly, isn't really anything new.
What was strong then is fragile now. National purpose faltering. Our feeling of collective responsibility starved of expression. The family unsupported.
We must fight back against the attitudes and assumptions that have brought parts of our society to this shocking state. In my very first act as leader of this party, I signalled my personal priority to mend our broken society.
That's what we've inherited. Not just an economic black hole, a societal black hole. And that's why we have to take action and do things differently.
Politicians love to hark back to a better time. Take back control. Make America great again. Pessimism that we're living in a period of decline, battling the optimism that things will and are getting better.
Never stop believing in the good sense of the British people. Never stop believing we can move forward to a fairer, more responsible, more prosperous Britain.
The doubters, the doomsters, the gloomsters, they are going to get it wrong again. The people who bet against Britain are going to lose their shirts because we're going to restore trust in our democracy.
The thing is that being in power used to be an asset. It used to mean an upswell of hope, at least initially. But right now, with bins overflowing in Birmingham, British Steel on the brink, and a growing sense of helplessness in a strange new world, it's perhaps little wonder that gloom has taken hold. And maybe the starkest example of broken Britain is the continued fallout of one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our history. Today, Sir Alan Bates, the former sub-postmaster caught up in the post office scandal, urged victims to take the government to court. Here's our North of England correspondent, Greg Milam.
Hello. The post office scandal changed the lives of Seema Misra and Lee Castleton. She was wrongly jailed while pregnant. For him and his family, the impact, he says, was devastating.
We've just hung in there, haven't we?
For them and hundreds of other former sub-postmasters, the campaign for justice has gone on too long. Hello. And the man who is the face of that campaign says now's the time for legal action against the government over delays in the payment of compensation. In an email seen by Sky News, Sir Alan Bates writes that the current rate of progress means it will be November 2027 before all the claims will be finished. The scheme is a mess, he writes, and has been almost since the time of its inception. Advice on how to streamline the process, he says, is ignored out of hand with the feeblest of excuses. On seeking a judicial review, he writes, returning to the courts may seem to be a long haul, but it will probably be the quickest way to ensure fairness for all. It isn't a step, though, that Lee wants to take.
The civil servants have this endless supply of lawyers on one hand and monies to pay for lawyers on the other. This is a litigation without a judge. Alan Bates' call to arms is about money and fairness. All we need is the government of the day and the civil servants to finally give fairness. And I think that's going to be really hard to achieve in a court.
For Seema, this is about the money and closure.
I'm still waiting for full and final compensation, but like closure, nowhere near, because we are fighting for full accountability. That need to be done. The only thing that will tempt me to go back to the court will be accountability, proper accountability, proper closure for everybody.
There are just under 500 people in what's called the Group Litigation Order Scheme. More than 280 of those have been paid in full. Another 100 are awaiting action from either side before their claims or offers can progress. But that leaves 108 people who've been made offers by the government which they're challenging. Most have received 80% of their claim already, but Sir Alan's accusation is that government lawyers are slowing moves for them to receive the full and final payment. The government disputes that, saying it's more than tripled compensation payments since the election. It has paid out almost £900 million so far.
Everyone in the country wants this resolved as quickly as possible, and that's why we've increased the pace so much. But I can only go off the data, and the data tells me we've had this massive increase in compensation payments since the election, and we will not stop until we've done the right thing by everybody.
Sir Alan says any legal action should include the hundreds of people in other schemes. I've done my bit, he wrote. It's time for others to step up to deliver what so many are still waiting for. Greg Milam, Sky News.
Right, let's bring Daisy McAndrew and Max Wilson back in, shall we? Daisy, it feels like the post office scandal has kind of come to epitomise this idea of broken Britain. You know, do you think the Sun front page is right today?
I think there are two different issues there. There's sort of broken Britain and broken politics, which aren't necessarily, one is you can argue one is the causal effect of politicians being useless. But I also want to come back to something Max was saying, which was absolutely right about the sort of reality of government for a new government often being very different to what they were either expecting or what they were promising to do when they get in. Now, obviously, people say you can't afford idealism when you're in government. You're dealing with reality, which is why you find that opposition politicians will often promise, the moon to the electorate, and then they get in and they either discover the reality or they know that actually they can't deliver what they wanted to. And I think that very well maybe what's happening with the post office. Yes, it's an absolute mess and a muddle, and it's been appalling for the victims. But sometimes the politicians are promising too much, and you have government lawyers whose sole purpose is to save the government money. And when your government lawyers are saying, and I'm not defending them, government lawyers are saying to the politicians, if we do what you want to do, we could open the floodgates to all sorts of other legal issues and the government could be bankrupted by it. That's why you end up with this sort of horrible situation where victims have been promised something and then it just doesn't happen.
And just to remind people, so the polling that was in that Survation poll with the Sun, 66% of people, the Red Wall, think the country is heading in the wrong direction. 68% think Britain is broken. That's people in the North and Midlands. Max, I mean, is that unusual, do you think? Or do you think we've always been a gloomy nation?
No, I don't think it's unusual. And I think it probably largely reflects where we were in the run-up to the election. There was this mood for change, and I think that Labour was steering into that. And I think your clip there, it's a classic framing that governments or insurgent parties even, they want to frame things around something's broken and we're going to be ones to fix it. And if you're in opposition, that's easier to do, obviously, because you don't have the power, but you're laying out a platform for how you would achieve it. I think that Labour right now, even though they've been in government for 8-9 months, I think that there's still a sense that actually, because the Tories were in power for so long, that Labour are still putting into practice what they want to do to fix Britain. I think that that's why in the run-up to the locals, which are coming up in a few weeks, I think Labour can continue with that song. But I'm not sure how much longer they can, because ultimately they are now in government and people are going to start getting a little bit tired of hearing them complaining about Tory years of power.
And the situation for a lot of people and a lot of businesses is very, very bad. Let's not forget the economy is on its knees. We've had the inflation that was caused by Ukraine war. We've had the cost of living crisis, and all this long hangover from long COVID. And the fact that people, families, businesses, bank balances, none of that has recovered from these buffets that we've had in this country. And we haven't recovered as well as many other Western countries from those shocks to the system. And so people are creaking, and people do see that public services are not performing, waiting lists are terrible, potholes are terrible, whatever it might be, and the bank balances are terrible. And now with Trump tariffs, people are scared that actually where is the light at the end of the tunnel? Yeah, it was interesting kind of watching back, Boris Johnson, Tony Blair. Do you think optimists win elections? Is that an important part of the messaging that works?
Definitely. People want to vote for people that they can believe in and they want to follow. That's leadership. But I think that there was a reason why Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, when they came in, they talked about this black hole because they wanted to set the scene for how the Tories have left the economy as broken Britain. This broken Britain that they're running with. I know it's a bit of the Reform are trying to own it, but honestly, this is the result of 13 years of Tory neglect. And I think that Labour are still in a position where they're saying, right, we know it's bad at the moment. We are trying to improve things. We're starting to put things into place. Bear with us whilst we get things up and running, and then you're going to start to feel the improvement. And I think in the next few weeks in the run-up to locals, you'll see that more optimism. And I think in the second half of the year, there'll be even more of it. OK, thank you both. For now, you're watching the Politics Hub coming up. After 2 years of bloodshed and suffering in the war in Sudan, the UK announces new help, saying unless there's action now, the crisis risks becoming an all-out catastrophe.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. To Sudan now, and the brutal war raging 2 years on with no sign of peace. The government today announced a £120 million food and aid package to help over the Sudanese people who've been caught up in the conflict. Foreign Secretary David Lammy hosted foreign ministers from nearly 20 countries to try to bring the warring factions closer to peace. He told the conference it must show it has not given up on Sudan.
We cannot resign ourselves to inevitable conflict. We cannot be back here 1 year from now having the same discussion. So today, let's show them and the world that we've not given up on them. We've not given up on Sudan.
Well, our Africa correspondent, Yusra El-Bair, has been reporting from Sudan since the crisis began. Here's a reminder of some of her work.
You never think war will come to you, to your hometown, to your neighborhood. Then it does. And all you can do is witness the tragedy and pray for it to end. But the reality is that it's always happening in someone's home, to someone's family and friends. This time, it was mine.
This place is full of memories, not just for me, but for everyone I know. It is the most iconic marketplace in the capital, if not the country. And it used to just be bustling, full of life. You could get anything that you wanted here. You could get antiques, you could get silver, you could get leather. And now this is what it is. It's just barren. And the shops were clearly looted long before this became a battleground. And now the destruction is complete.
When the war in the news is the war at home, every event feels personal. An intimate reminder for millions of people that the home of our memories, of our loved ones, of our friends, is slowly ceasing to exist.
Let's bring Max and Daisy back in, shall we? I mean, there's obviously incredibly powerful footage there from Yusra and Max. But is there a bit of an uneasy dynamic? We've obviously got the Foreign Secretary hosting this summit while the government's taking money out of the aid budget. Does that kind of undermine his authority a bit, do you think?
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. And your film was, as you say, very, very powerful. It's absolutely tragic what's happening over there. But I think that it's a good thing that Lammy has hosted this summit today, and it is a good thing that the government is pledging hundreds of millions. But you know, where is that money coming from? That aid budget has been halved. You know, that again, I mean, I would say argue rightly so, because we need to bump up our defence budget. But it does slightly undermine the argument, and I think it's a good thing also that. We're in Easter recess from Parliament as well, so it's a good time for Lammy to be drawing attention to something like this. And tragically as well, so often we end up neglecting horrendous stories like this, especially in Africa. So I'm glad that that's happening. We're able to shine a light on it.
I think that's a really good point, because these stories, these atrocities and wars don't get as much attention in Africa as they do for obvious reasons. That Ukraine, right on our doorstep in Europe, and Gaza, of course, has had a huge amount of media attention and diplomatic attention, and political leadership has attention. But the problem with that is, of course, you've got Ukraine, you've got Gaza taking all the oxygen either from the political leaders or journalists and so on. And really, these atrocities, with hundreds of thousands of people dying, have barely received any. So it is good to see Lammy, because there's an awful lot in Lammy's in tray at the moment. So it is good to see him devoting some time and effort.
And obviously, you've got the US also cutting their aid budget. You know, is this a very bad time for these humanitarian crises across the world?
Yeah, it's absolutely horrendous. And I know lots of Labour MPs are hugely concerned about that. It's a real something that so many Labour MPs are so passionate about, being proud of Britain's commitment to international aid. And so I think that cut that happened, there are still political problems, there's still repercussions from that. And yeah, as I say, it's a good thing that Lammy is doing what he's doing today, but I think the politics haven't disappeared from that.
Yeah. Actually, it's very interesting what you were saying about the Labour Party and this issue. Just going back to JD Vance earlier, in that interview he did with Unheard, the bit that we've been talking about, of course, for obvious reasons, national self-interest, has been UK-US trade deal. But actually, one of the really interesting things was he was criticising European nations for not being critical enough of George Bush's government when it came to the run-up in Iraq. And he sort of cast your mind back to those years. And so he's now saying, you know, you lot should have been more vocal. You know, that war was a terrible idea. And yet we've got a situation now. We've got politicians in the Western world who aren't being vocal at all about what's going on somewhere else. Obviously, it's not an American and UK-led war, but interesting comparatively.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, as David Lammy said, instability spreads is something that is in Sudan now. How much further will it reach? Right, thank you both so much. Still to come on the Politics Hub. It just came apart in my hands, said literally every toddler standing over smashed vase ever as the Vice President drops a football championship trophy. We thought it was a good excuse to bring you a selection of the best, or should we say worst, political fumbles.
Coming up on the UK tonight at 8, sue the government. That's the message from Sir Alan Bates today, telling wrongfully convicted sub-postmasters still waiting for compensation that taking the government to court is the best way forward. Also, senior police officers join calls for under-16s to be banned from social media, and there is anger in North London as the owners of Toby Carvery chopped down an ancient oak tree because of health and safety fears. All that and much more on the UK tonight at 8 o'clock.
The Premier League Run-In is live on NBC and streaming on Peacock, with a crucial fixture in the race for Europe. Saturday, the unrelenting drama heats up as both Aston Villa and Newcastle chase Champions League qualification. An opportunity neither want to squander. This is the Premier League Run-In, live on NBC and Peacock.
The only way into Gaza for us right now is with the Israeli military. The IDF had brought us in to show us a tunnel network under a residential neighbourhood.
The length of time it must have to have created these tunnels must have taken years.
At the end of the day, it's war at the top. It's war down here.
I'm Alistair Bunkle, Sky's Middle East correspondent based here in Jerusalem. As we were filming, there was a gun battle in the next street.
This neighbourhood, the Israeli military say, was the stronghold of Hamas's Rafah brigade.
It was just after 6:30 a.m. when the first shots were fired.
I remember everything. It was a day that I don't think I'll ever be able to forget.
There's no moon, perfect conditions for smugglers and human traffickers trying to move fuel, weapons and people.
The valleys in between, they're some of the main smuggling routes.
After days of negotiation, a major smuggler here has agreed to meet us.
The families that we've spoken to of people who have died trying to cross into Europe, they say you're a murderer. Are you a murderer?
No.
Sky News, get the full story first. Begum was 15 when she left East London with 2 school friends to join Islamic State in Syria.
Do you feel that you have committed a crime to the extent that you should serve time in a British prison?
I mean, I feel like the only crime I committed was coming here.
If you can't take the heat, get out of the kitchen. I can take the heat. The second thing that Harry Truman said, was in politics, if you want a friend, get a dog.
My children will love a dog.
In Tel Aviv, a constant streak of interceptions filled the night sky as waves of missiles came in.
It appears to be a very, very large and sustained attack on Israel.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, we started the programme with the US Vice President and we're going to end with him as well. And a rather unfortunate mishap as the White House hosted a college football team after their playoff victory. As Mr Vance was preparing to pose for a photo with the team and their trophy, he accidentally separated it from its base and dropped it on the floor. He was able to replace the base and gamely tried to style it out. Well, it couldn't happen to anyone. And in fact, I think some people can style it out a bit more than others. What do you think? Did JD Vance manage to style that out, Max?
No. He just dropped the thing and picked it up. There's no style or to that. No, I think he gets 0 points for style.
I had some sympathy with him because it was that thing where you think the bottom and the top are attached and you pick up one bit and the bottom goes right. So I had some sympathy. But politicians can be very cack-handed.
And we were kind of reminiscing in our office today, the times when these sort of mishaps have happened. Neil Kinnock on the breach at party conference in Brighton. Rishi Sunak, it's not necessarily his fault, the rain outside Downing Street. When can people solve this out?
Well, Boris Johnson was the king of it. We remember him dangling in on the zip line and then talk about dropping things, playing rugby and practically taking out a small child as he just went full pelt towards him. So, but yeah, he could style it out.
You basically got a free pass to do whatever blunder, which would end most people's political careers.
Yes, because he would literally laugh it off, which, of course, a lot of politicians, you get the rictus grin, but not a genuine laugh. And, of course, the one thing that makes you embarrassed for somebody is when they look embarrassed. If they don't look remotely embarrassed, they win, they get away with it.
Or some people are kind of so cool, like Obama, that, if he was in the rain announcing election, I feel like he would get away with it.
For sure.
And, I mean, I guess the other thing we thought was that it sort of plays into a narrative, like with Rishi Sunak in the rain, that was a kind of low ebb. Is it that if these things happen when someone is in, a low point, it just brings them down further? Theresa May as well with the letters, we forgot about that one.
I think it all depends on the preconceived notions about that person. If it's Boris Johnson and he's popular, they're like, oh, good old Boris dangling from a harness. If it's Theresa May and you already think she's quite awkward, like, oh my God, please stop her dancing. This is, this is making my tummy turn. and Rishi Sunak, he was already a dead man walking. So when he came out and he just looked like a drowned rat. But, and sort of pathetic. But again, if it had been a popular politician, you would have thought, good on them, good British weather, struggling through it and, good for them. And it's all to do with the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, I think that is right. I think I agree. The one I was thinking about was Ed Miliband and the bacon sandwich as well.
Oh, my gosh, we forgot about that. How could we forget?
Well, it's still fresh in my mind, unfortunately. I still bear the scars. I think that one of the reasons why that didn't really have an immediate hit. I remember when I was working for the party, it was very much a slow burner and it happened in the months afterwards. But I think the thing was that there was this overarching narrative that Ed looked a bit weird. And I think that particular shot just reinforced that, which basically plays to your point.
Yeah, and we'd had what was the tombstone thing?
The Ed Stone.
So I'm bringing up past traumas. But yes, he had sort of become a bit of a meme and a bit of a joke, so it played into that thought of him.
Can make politicians look a bit more human sometimes, perhaps, but.
All to do with how well or badly they style it out, I think.
Yeah, but I think of George Osborne as well being booed at, was it the Paralympics?
That's right, yeah. Again...
Because people do want to see a human side, don't they, to their politicians?
Yes, but the booing happened because I think it was just after the Omnishambles budget, so everyone was annoyed about the pasty tax and everything else and austerity. But I think that particular moment, there was also a little bit of, God, he's just got to stand there and take this horrible, horrible experience. And maybe it did humanise him for some, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Was it Blair with the WI when he got slow hand clapped, by the Women's Institute? And of course, Blair didn't suffer from that sort of thing very often, and he could style out most things, but even he could, you can't survive the wrath of hundreds of members of the Women's Institute.
And some politicians, including Keir Starmer historically, do get accused of being robotic. So it's a fine line, isn't it? Yeah. Showing a bit of humanity without having too many missteps. Right, thank you both so much, particularly for that last chat. No mishaps here on the Politics Hub. That is it from us tonight. I'll see you tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Kamali Melbourne. After that, it will be The World Tonight. We look forward to seeing you again, same time, same place, tomorrow evening. Thanks for watching.